Who've come and still enjoy the space program and what we've been doing in the past and what we're going to try to do in the future. Of course, I don't know if you probably, if you're over here in the first place looking at space artifacts and space pictures and all that, you probably all saw the movie Apollo 13, right? Yeah. And you thought that Kim Ford would have Tom Hanks out here talking, right? I know, I get it all the time. Where's that real Apollo 13 guy? Well, you all know the story about Apollo 13, so I'm not going to elaborate on that. I will digress a little bit and tell you a little bit about that movie, because after the three of us got down from the flight and we were on the aircraft carrier, and we looked at each other, and we were all still alive. That was, of course, Jack Swikert, Fred Hayes, and myself. We said at that time, we ought to write something about this story. I mean, about the flight. It was such an interesting mission. Even before the explosion occurred, there were things that happened on this flight that were sort of unusual, to take off at 1313 and all that kind of stuff. And so we all vowed that we would write the story together sometime in the future. We all get together. But like all promises, you know, and all these vows, all three of us had to work for a living. And Swikert eventually went into politics in Colorado, and Fred Hayes went into the aerospace industry in Grumman. I ended up in the telephone industry in Houston, and so we probably forgot about the story. It wasn't until we sold our company in Houston and I moved to Chicago, where the company that bought our company, I became an officer of that company. And when I retired from that company in 1991, I was on the board, so they very graciously gave me my office and my secretary to sort of wind down in retirement, so that the cultural shock of my wife would be too great being home all the time. And the day I walked into the office after I retired, I looked at my secretary and I said, well, what should we do? We don't have to worry about telephones anymore. And she said, well, why don't you write that book you've been telling me about? Good idea. So I started to look up, you know, the people that were involved and all that. When out of the blue, I got a letter from a young man by the name of Jeff Kluger, a writer for the Discover magazine, a science magazine. I think it's owned by the Disney people. And he said, I want to write a book about Apollo 13. I've never written a book before, written a lot of articles, but no books. Could you help me? And I said, well, that's what I want to do. And anyway, I liked his style of writing, and so we got together, and the result was the book, which a lot of you have in your bags. We first wrote one chapter, however, and then we put an outline on either side of that chapter, and that was the proposal to send to various publishing companies to see if someone would back us up in writing this book. And we did get a company, Hood Mifflin, said, okay, we'll give you 1 year to write the book, and that's it. So I was kind of happy, because this was a project that kept me off the golf course. And about 2 months had gone by. I hadn't written another word in that book. We were, doing interviews and looking up accident reports and flight plans and things like that. And I got a call from our agent, and he said, are you sitting down? And I said, well, yeah, why? And I thought to myself, well, there must be a remorse clause in that publishing contract that said if we're not satisfied in 30 days, the whole deal is off, sent back in advance. Well, he said, we just sold your book to the movies. I said, we haven't written it yet. Isn't that illegal? And he said, no, it's done all the time. What we actually sold was an option to do the story of Apollo 13 to Imagine Entertainment, which is Ron Howard's production company. But what turned that option into a finished product was a young man about 11 years old at the time we made this flight. He was a closet astronaut. He was a space enthusiast. Knew the names of all the astronauts. I'm sure he'd be here today. Knew the names of the flights and the problems they had. Of course, his name was Tom Hanks. And when Hanks, who was in Paris at the time, he heard that Howard had an option to do the story, lobbied for the job. And this is just after he won an Oscar for that movie called Philadelphia. And so when Universal heard that Howard had lead actor of Tom Hanks, they decided to do the movie. They provided the funds and, of course, the facilities to make the movie. The first thing they did was to go down to the Johnson Space Center to go through there to talk to all the people that were involved in Apollo 13 and look at the control center, because they were going to make an exact duplicate of it, a replica of it in the studio. And since I have a home just west of Austin, they invited me down to the Space Center to be one of the hosts to take them through. And as I was taking them through, Hanks was with them. He pulled me aside and he said, "Look at Jim, if I'm going to play your part, I have to know more about you. I have to know your idea of the flight from your perspective so I can accurately portray you in the movie, your mannerisms, and the way you speak, and relations with your wife and the whole thing." I said, "Well, Tom, I have a home just west of Austin. Why don't you fly down and spend the weekend with us? And I have videotapes, and I've got the flight plans, and I got the accident reports. We can kind of go over the flight, give you an idea of what the story is. You can meet my wife." He said, "Fine." So he flew into Austin. I own a small airplane, and I took it from where we live, a place called Horseshoe Bay, flew over to Austin and picked him up. But when he got in this airplane, I noticed that this fellow was a little worried. Actors and actresses, they got mega bunch, and they're used to big corporate jets and 747s or something like that. But I kind of figured that this fellow was going to play the part of a naval aviator, a test pilot, an astronaut. We got to get started right away. Now the flight from where I live, or from Austin to where I live, called Horseshoe Bay, takes 15 minutes. I took an hour and a half. I try to remember all those things I did years ago as a test pilot, approaches to stalls, unusual attitudes. I noticed he wasn't saying too much over there, but he hung in. And during the quiet part of the flight, I was flying along trying to think of something to say to him, and I said, "Tom, when we heard that you were going to be in this movie, Apollo 13, my wife and I ran out and saw your latest movie, Philadelphia, and, congratulations, you got the Oscar and everything." He said, "Well, thank you." And I was trying to think of something else to say to this fella. And I was flying along. I said, "Well, didn't you make another movie after Philadelphia?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "What was the name of that movie?" And he said, "Gump." I said, "Gump?" He said, "Yeah, Forrest Gump." Now that movie had not yet been released. I knew nothing about the movie, so I asked him, I said, "Tom, tell me about this movie. What's it all about?" And Tom Hanks told me the story of Forrest Gump. And I thought to myself, "Houston, do we have another problem?" And the movie was quite accurate, and so it was a good presentation of the real story of Apollo 13. And I'm kind of glad I'm here, and I guess we better start signing some books.
There you go. Yeah, I sell NASA photos.
What's that?
I sell NASA photos, so probably a lot of the things you signed today, people got from me.
I never did actually great source for unsigned photos. Bizarre ones.
Hard to come by. NASA doesn't make it easy for the average person to get them.
Is that right?
Well, it's just time-consuming bureaucracy. It's it takes 2 months to get in.
And then you get 45 of them, right. The same one.
Well, they didn't show it. That's what
Teachers get it. It's good. Because it's fun though. You're getting to the end, so it's been a long day. One more of those, and the last one you can just sign. So left hand. Make it easy.